you. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Judith, for organising this event today. It's a pleasure to be here, honoured to be here. And like all of you, I'd rather be outside in some ways, but you learn a lot from these kinds of conversations. I hope I can add something useful to them in my short 10 minutes now. I have a paper that I've authored on the cultural geography of Occupy activism that's on my website. So if anyone wants to explore my thoughts and reflections about Occupy activism at greater length, they're on my website. Just Google Matt Spark and you can get to it pretty quickly. And in that paper I talk about 7 problem spaces that Occupy activism has brought out for attention and for critical questioning and for hopeful utopian imagining too. But I'm not going to dwell on those 7 problem spaces right now. Instead I want to make 2 broad points, one about space and one about time, that hopefully pull out some of what I've taken from as key insights from the 3 preceding papers, because as I understand it, that's what these guys wanted me to do, which is to operate more as a commentator than a sort of a keynoter. So let me start with space, because I am a geographer, and we geographers have a fascination with all things spatial, and pull out some of the spatial lessons of the 3 preceding speakers. Jim used this fascinating ornithological metaphor. You probably didn't even think of it as an ornithological metaphor, but nevertheless, that's what I think it is. In asking this question, what makes place a radical nesting ground? Now, of course, birds that do the nesting we go with the vehicle of this metaphor, are often migratory animals, and I think this pulls out metaphorically a key theme that Jim was trying to make into a broader analytical argument, a very important and useful one, I think, about the significance of global networks and of cosmopolitan consciousness in shaping forms of place-based radicalism. To understand those place-based radical movements, one has to also understand, it seems, the extra-local ties, whether they're the migrant ties of Filipino cannery workers and the internationalism of the ILWU, or the kinds of networks that are invoked by Occupy activists today that Chital was talking about. These starfishes clearly cross oceans, and one of the interesting things that I'd like to think will become something that this double session today can explore and perhaps problematize is a distinguishing feature of Occupy vis-a-vis the Tea Party movement is precisely its internationalism. The Adbusters' call to bring a tent to Occupy Wall Street was issued from this Canadian anti-capitalist or anti-commodification magazine that's based in Vancouver. And not only was that a cross-border call to action in the United States by a Canadian magazine, but it also said, in a sort of a footnote to the call, "Are you ready for another Tahrir moment?" An invocation of what had happened in Egypt before, and a sort of a call to think about the inspiration from overseas. Now, the starfishes of Occupy of Occupy activism have not just had international inspirations, they've also had international emulations too. And so after Occupy Wall Street started, after the success of the movement in spreading across the United States, the various centers of business class 1% rule, there were obviously all sorts of emulations elsewhere in the world, in Canada, notably in Western Europe, in London, outside St. Paul's Cathedral, in parts of Latin America, and back in Egypt, where people also talking about Occupy Wall Street. There was a sort of a recycling of these starfish, whatever animals we want to talk about, birds as they flying around the world, talking about similar issues. I'll come back to the similar issues in a moment. But I was also struck by the cosmopolitanism of Ian's account of his entry into direct action activism. It's hard to follow you, Ian, because that was by no means blather. It was a terrific account, and it seems to me that that this extraordinary experience that you'd had in Iraq really did radicalize you, returning back to the United States, and has led directly to your direct action involvement and the meaningfulness of that action for you, and presumably also your frustrations with the TV kind of commentary, and sort of yearning for something more real, more grounded, but at the same time more transformative. So as a cosmopolitan consciousness now, it illustrates exactly what Jim was talking about as an important contributor to place-based radicalism. But I think there's obviously more than just these sort of cross-spatial influences and inspirations going on in Occupy. There's something else very significant that is more of a temporal thing, a historical thing. And I was actually struck, Jim, by the fact that you offered us more of a geographical account of Seattle's transformations over time, and didn't spend so much time talking about what distinguishes these moments where the radicalism that you highlighted, like why did it erupt in those particular historical conjunctures. And clearly there is a temporal moment to why Occupy activism has taken off in the fall of 2011, why it seems to have staying power into the spring of 2012. And that temporal conjuncture it is connected to the ups and downs of global capitalism and to the crises that's started most spectacularly with the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008 and the subsequent long recession, global depression that's ensued. Naomi Klein, when she made the speech to Occupy activists in Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan, highlighted the fact that while she was still proud to have been a member of the anti-WTO movement back in 1999, the anti-neoliberal movement, the global justice movement as it became known, while she was still very proud to have associated herself with that, she was struck by the fact that back in 1999 it was very hard to make a case against the contradictions and violence and exclusions of global capitalism, particularly in affluent centers of it, like Seattle and New York City, because these were boom times. Credit was cheap, and even relatively lower middle class, working class people could afford mortgages and get granite countertops and all the rest of it, at least in the United States. There was a disconnect between our populations here and people in places like Argentina or South Korea or Thailand or Indonesia that had seen the 1997-98 crisis and experienced structural adjustment, IMF style and so forth. There was a disconnect. But fast forward a decade to 2008, 2009, 2010, and instead the United States and most of the 99% inhabiting this country start to experience many of the same kinds of troubles that have haunted so much of the rest of the world for longer. And there's this temporal moment that in turn explains why these birds of activism have horizontally networked across the planet, because these are not just resonating as ideas, there's a political, economic context that explains why the ideas are traveling, why they're resonating with people around the world. It's not, I don't think, purely the technology. It's the fact that so much of the world is suffering from similar political economic problems, and that, I think, in turn has to be something we bring front and center to an analysis of why Occupy activism has happened now, why it's happening now, and also what ties it significantly to the Tea Party movement. So there are ties, and the "don't tread on me" element of Tea Party activism, the profound concern with the bailouts of the 1% in Wall Street, that were the original part of Tea Party activism before it got co-opted by Dick Armey and the Republicans. That's something that actually connects Tea Party populism with, I think, the more robust political economic critique that has been articulated at Occupy events around the United States and more broadly around the rest of the world. So hopefully we can talk about that later. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matt.